Um, it, last
Okay.
time only we had
So,
started talking about competition, exploitation, business, and profit.
mm,
So in reference to
yeah.
that, connected.
So what I'm saying is, how do you really put a value to someone's time? Like if farmer is doing a farming 8 hours a day and producing food for you, and other person is doing I'm teaching for 2 hours online, 2, 3 hours, 4 hours online. Uh, how do you differentiate between what is the value of this time spent and what is the value and how do you justify it to someone? Or a coder or a tech person for same amount of time makes way more money, but I feel the work educator does is way more meaningful. How do you do that? Like, and then the expectations are also colored in that way, that the world we live in, uh like for example, there are people, I was talking to someone in the morning and they told me that if I take nothing, that means lakh rupees a month. So
That
now,
means
how do you, if I charge nothing for this work, like I take the bare minimum, then it
hmm.
means lakh rupees a month at least. Lowest
Oh,
person.
okay.
Like nothing is 1 lakh rupees a month, because this person make 10 lakh rupees a month. So, if they
Oh,
take nothing for it, they are saying, "Ki I like it's almost free doing either it's a, like I do it for free, or if I take some like minimum bare minimum, it is 1 lakh rupees a month." So then how do you really do that is I think I to feel completely lost in how do you put value to someone's work in the current system, and
yeah.
how do you differentiate?
Yeah, that's the problem. Actually. The current system, may this evaluation is very skewed. I mean, someone is earning 10 lakhs a month. And if you were to start going by that metric, then you won't be able to serve anyone who's not earning in those numbers. And most people aren't.
Correct.
Yeah.
And most jobs, and even if you go lower, let's say you say decent, what is decent? How do you even measure? Let's forget ye wala example. Just putting that value to farmer and anything else, anyone else. How do you do that?
Yeah. 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 So that is the part actually. When he's talking about um, righteous wealth, when we covered in policy, in character, there's righteous spouse, righteous wealth. That section, in that section, he really talks about what that is and how the evaluation will occur. And in fact, then there's this distinct, and he mentioned how the main thing we are missing is being able to find the value of the human. And so, because whenever we're engaging in any occupation, we're either doing, so it's classified it as shram or seva. So, which is we're putting in some effort or we're doing some service. So,
Hmm.
shram is, I mean, even service involves effort, but shram is just like physical effort. Right. Or we're doing some act of service. And so then, what really is involved and how do you, so what one really measures and tries to quantify is the physical effort. Because one, even like say if I'm, helping you out or doing something out of seva, when there's a human exchange happening, I often don't feel like I don't want you to pay me for it or anything like that because it's like out of the, it's just a feeling of sharing that is happening. Comes out of the relationship or something. It's like yeah. It's part of that engagement in the relationship. Yeah. So, but then how to quantify each and how to quantify the first because there's some shram involved in seva also, and because you're involved in employing some time and effort, and if you're doing it say as an occupation, how would you go about it? Also, how would it be ideally, and how do you start right now as we stand today in this system? So there's another really interesting thing that he says that teachers say, अगर आप कीचड़ में अटके हुए हो, if you're stuck in a swamp, then and you want to come out of it, then the first step will always be in teacher itself, in the swamp itself. Yeah. So like the systems or mechanisms that we come up with right now, they won't be ideal because that's not what the situation is like. The first step will be in the swamp and it will be messy and all. But we know if we know where we're headed, in true evaluation, right? Even right now,
Hmm.
like you were saying, there's no value given to the hard labor put in. Yes. And like excessive, no, like arbitrarily high value given to something like spending a few hours on the computer. And a lawyer or whatever. Yeah. Doctor.
Hmm.
And very non-essential things also. Doctors at least
Very
are very
non-essential
essential.
things.
I
Hmm.
mean, doctors and teachers are still like extremely essential, but so like in COVID, we realized who all are really essential contributors to the society to keep it running. Everything else could take a back seat, of course, or change its way, but all the people who are doing the everyday stuff, producing the food, maintaining the infrastructure, transportation, all those. They were,
Yeah.
you realize how,
It seems almost like unless everyone, or at least the people you're working with, unless you have the same uh, kind of value system,
yeah.
same way to evaluate something, then the exchange will be satisfactory from both sides. And I think that would be like something that's just, like both people feel like I
Yeah.
haven't overpaid and I haven't underpaid. But even if you underpay, you feel bad actually. you know?
Yeah. True.
So in whatever way you pay, you feel bad if you don't put in enough
Yeah.
of something. So how can both people feel satisfied? And that would only be with a common value system, no, or common benchmark for evaluation.
Yeah, exactly.
How does that come about?
Yeah. That's
Hmm.
that's exactly it. We're talking about Chetna Vikas Mulya Shiksha is value education for consciousness development. So the main thing is to recognize the inherent values in existence, actually. So yeah, that's exactly it. We haven't found a common value system at the moment.
Yeah.
Therefore, there's a
Mhm.
constant mismatch.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to educate ourselves for. That's what one of the entire books, one of the books is entirely dedicated to actually. It's called Avartanshil Arthashastra. So cyclical economics.
Right.
Hmm.
That's all about the economics based on such a value system.
And like everything is cyclical, no, in nature. So
Yeah,
to have something that's sustainable would have to be of the same nature, right?
right. Yeah, and then you see that things that are not cyclical are often actually given extra value. I mean, just because they're so rare or just so hard to find. And then you realize that that's actually completely at odds with what you really should be valuing.
Right.
Hmm.
At odds with existence and at odds with order. Which is about the lake. Or say even diamond, extraction.
Yeah.
Not gonna end and no.
And I think also cyclical structure implies that it's connected to itself, like, you know, organic way or something. If you go in any direction, which is either up or down, it's going to fizzle out in some way, right? It's not going to be able to sustain. Either it'll go down, crash, or it'll go up and crash in its own way.
Yeah, it will, yeah, like the growth in our economy. Actually, it's actually just going down only. Like, how is it even going up? Because actually, we're depleting the resources.
Yeah. So that is going down only.
Yeah.
Yeah, there could be no up if it's not cyclical in some ways.
Right. Yeah. There is no up. So yeah, this is an interesting, very useful thing to kind of meditate on. The fact that we need a universal value system, even in order to have fair trade and fair exchange, fair occupation. And for that, we need to be able to appreciate human value. Because that's a lot of what we put in.
But then, what about this aspect which, like, for example, Vinesh, you don't charge for sharing Jeevan Vidya, or that is the aspect. We have seen so many other places that education, like Shram, is considered as something production आप कर रहे हो and you're making your living out of it. But if I understood it correctly, uh, Viniji rejected any kind of service industry as money, right money, right? Unless it's a parishram ka paisa, हाथ का parishram, it's not uh, righteous money. So then, keeping that, then how do you really charge for an education? Because then it's not हाथ का काम. So then do you not charge for it? And
Right.
or
So
anything
this
related to service, for example, healing. Now, it's my knowledge, I can heal
Baba
you.
was a Vaidya.
Hmm.
And he did some farming and production, but mostly he ran his house based on being a Vaidya. and he is not charged for his treatment. But what he did put in his effort in, which was production of the medicine, that he charged for substantially. Like, and also then because he was charging, because he set a value to it, which was acceptable to the people, then he also had a lot of people that he didn't charge anything from, because he felt like, you know, you're my family member and I'm just treating you. So that is a relationship. So there are these, you know, there's no that it's when I really look at how he did it that I realize that there's no idealism about it. Like, you can't set one rule and be like, oh, there's just no charge. You have to see what the more fundamental sort of principle is, which is that, like, when you are living in a relationship and doing things out of the relationship, then obviously you don't want to charge someone for it. But when you are putting in the effort and doing something as an occupation, it is outside of a relationship, then whatever you're putting in the effort for, that you can always charge. You evaluate it and see if the other values are equally. And when they do, then that becomes a very fair and mutually satisfying, acceptable exchange. And like, you know, we saw him living that way. And there were so many people actually, who were the family member, basically, extended family at the end of the day.
And I think both sides can feel, right? Like when somebody is close, you don't feel like charging them, and they would feel strange to be charged, but there are other people who would feel strange not being charged also, because it isn't like that. So,
yeah, that often happened actually when a lot of us started producing our own stuff, and we don't feel like when you produce so much, and especially when you start working with nature, you realize the bounty of nature. Actually, there's this, you have one tree and then you have so many lychees out of it, and
so many seeds which can make so many more trees.
it's just way more than anyone can do. When you naturally want to just share it, share the surplus. When you feel like you have way more than you need. And so even when we started, everyone started producing. One first thing was it felt like, oh wow, we have way more than we need for our sustenance over there. So whatever they may be producing, rice or dal or whatever. So then the next most obvious feeling is that no, you want to share whatever you have with all your friends and family, and there's no money exchange. Like, it felt odd for them to be asking for money, and then of course whatever was left was then sold or whatever. But slowly start realizing that, you know, if we keep taking and then, you know, you start feeling odd also, how will they sustain it if they give so much? Like, if you know, our friend is producing tur dal, and when they've produced enough for themselves, they give us a whole year's supply of tur dal. You feel odd just taking it and not contributing similarly. You also feel like you also want to contribute to them. So then how do you balance that out? And it's kind of people, it's like barter systems are really things that things that rarely ever existed. One also finds in economic anthropology. It's never about, oh, you know, I need rice from you and you're a rice producer and I have tur dal and we'll exchange that. No. So when I have a lot of tur dal, I'll give you your needs worth. And when you have a lot of whatever you produce, you'll give me my needs worth. It's not a one-on-one exchange. So figuring out those dynamics. And then when it comes to seva though, that's a bit trickier to figure out. And I think that's what requires a bit more clarity on really what it is you're bringing. And he talks about also how education and educators, like a JV workshop is not something that you have a regular, it's just a workshop, no? It's just like, you know, you go out into society and you tell them, look, this exists. This is how things are. It's not like you're having some systematic prolonged engagement and a prolonged relationship, or investment of your time. And it's not like a school is with children. You know, there's a consistent guidance
beyond the short period.
Yeah, that's a teacher-student relationship. Whereas that's not the case with a facilitator. It's just a sharing. And even there, the infrastructure and all the sustenance of the workshop, the material part of it, that is all charged. That is paid for.
Yeah, correct. I think where I agree. The point is that it's a 7-day thing. It's not a full-time thing that you're doing. You're doing 3 times a week, and that is a part of your life which you're doing as seva. But
Yeah.
if you're doing it full time and creating a program, then that's a different thing. Two things are not
Yeah.
comparable.
No.
Hmm.
And then society will also, of course, if someone's spending a majority of their time in education, out of the bountiness of their desire to share something that they are able to share. And then if society recognizes that this is something that society also requires, then society works towards kind of, helping them feel stable enough to be able to share. But that also has to be, it's not just about donations and all, actually. That's not the system. But there has to be that shared value system where, this is not a shortcut. Like, it's not a mechanical system that you can put in place without having understood the value behind it. Like, you can't just take a shortcut of, okay, I'm just going to teach and I'm not going to contribute physically, materially, while society supports me. Because you realize that we have infinite mental potential, and therefore we can share infinitely to a certain extent. Within a certain limit, we have that infinite ability to be able to share and guide and do that teacher student, perform this teacher student role. But our bodies are limited, and our bodies need continuous refueling, and continuous shelter and apparel and all. So when we are doing seva, when we're doing some occupation related to seva, we are, expending something. We're not expending something that's getting exhausted. But when someone is putting in their body, they're expending something that is getting exhausted and needs to be replenished. So that will require a lot. That's still, whether or not, let me put it, see how to put it actually. Whether or not I am teaching, I will necessarily need food, water, shelter, and just the same as someone who is actually producing the food. So, if there can't be, like, the majority of people on this planet need to be producing food, shelter, and apparel in order to meet the requirements of the majority of people. And so, even you can't have a majority that is not the working. The majority, and then when you recognize this as a teacher, it would be someone who's wiser and who recognizes the reality. They would feel that they should also contribute to this working on material contribution that is necessary for everyone, and not exploit someone else's labor. Right? So there would be this natural intent to balance it out. So there'll be some production on your part also as a teacher. Otherwise, what are you teaching? But of course, since you're spending a lot of your time in teaching, therefore you can't do as much.
Right.
So
You do some.
you can do some. Yeah. And as we continue teaching and as we continue producing, we get more and more efficient at both. So we have more time for both, actually. And we have more surplus of both. So that's also a principle. But the value to be recognized is that we all require material goods. And we have inexhaustible mental power. And so, this can be expended much more easily,
More generously.
And without anything required in return to replenish it. Whereas when you're expending a physical body, you need something to do. So the teacher is also expending their body.
Yeah.
So that also needs to be recognized
Acknowledged,
and acknowledged. But how much of it and how to evaluate it and all that, that's
Correct.
a matter of relationships and justice.
This is very
Also,
actually
where you
meaningful.
accept your money from, in some ways, it's like, of course there are ethics, but like you're saying that, when you first try and step out of the swamp, you step into the swamp, right? Because actually everyone almost is doing work which is not in a just system, right? So you can't accept, you will have to accept to some extent. But while you're still working towards finding a different system or making people more aware, so we can create a different system. But you might at the same time you still need to eat, and you may not be able to find a sustainable source of income. So you may have to take from somebody who comes to the workshop but is bringing corporate money. What do you do? I think that's like the first step in the kitchen. Yeah.
And actually
Yeah.
also even for one's own, like before you're a teacher, you have to be full in yourself, right? And like he mentioned, and we're just going to cover it also very soon. The things that happen when you feel completely fulfilled, when you feel self-reliant and actually confident to be able to, they say, you have to evidence yourself at 3 levels. First, you have to feel self-reliant within yourself. Then you have to be able to evidence it in your family, and then in society you evidence. So even to feel that first one, you have to feel confident in being able to meet your own needs. I mean, this is way before you're a teacher or anything. If you feel incapable of meeting your own needs, whatever they may be, you'll constantly feel that sense of insecurity. And actually that confidence also comes from both. A knowledge of the principles of nature, that nature is naturally bountiful. You just need to put a little bit of effort and it gives so much. And then also recognizing the limits of your own needs. And then in the combination of both, you feel like, oh yeah, actually I can do this. And of course, you have to train your body. But once you recognize the principles, then you naturally want to train your body.
But tell me something in
Self-reliant in
this.
what? Say
Yeah. Go on, no, go on.
No, you go ahead.
I was saying self-reliance in one is I am self-reliant. One, I'm a self-reliant as a family. Now, these are two different things. Self-reliance, if I want to be self-reliant completely, then I have to make sure my food I'm cooking, I'm able to have livelihood to buy my food. I have everything like managing an independent life. But as a family, maybe then I share someone else is taking care of making money for the family. And someone else is taking care of doing other sections of household work. So which self-reliance is are we talking? One is like, or one when we talk, ki pehle you have to achieve a self-reliance within yourself, and then you extend it to a family, and then you extend it to society. So now when we say that, then if someone is self-reliant as a family, but not self-reliant independently, so then that state should happen. That first you become self-reliant independently, and then you can choose that. Then you become self-reliant as a family, and then you choose whether you want to. You get my point, right? Like the moment I become as a family self-reliant, there are parts of independent self-reliance which I can give up if I want to. And if you look at what people are doing also right now, that individuality comes in, that they're trying in a different way to be very self-reliant, that, I want to
That's what
be
I would call
doing everything.
self-reliant.
That's
Yeah.
what they think of as self-reliant, that I want to make sure I am capable of doing everything. And then in that race, somehow they're compromising in other aspects of life to remain self-reliant. Because yes, time, it's a function that if I'm doing everything, then I will miss time for something other. So what I just wanted to just was
Yeah.
thinking and hear your thoughts on that same. And
Yeah.
Pasha, were you saying something?
Yeah, I was
You were
kind of
saying something on self-reliance.
I was kind of wondering what it means ultimately. They're not very sure because in some ways I feel like even nature, like everything is like even a tree relies on like the earth or the rain, or like we all interdependent. So there's nothing independent of the system. And so
Correct.
I feel like it has to be understood. Like I mean, I don't know how to understand it because I understand what it means to kind of make yourself more capable so you can do more on your own and also help others. Like because I'm so self-reliant, you can actually be generous as well. So I understand that, but like it's something about the term kind of sticks with me because it's like none of us are isolated apart from each other. So I sometimes feel like it might be misleading or something. I don't know.
Right. No, it's because it's used also that way.
Yeah.
In modernity, that's how it's supposed to be. That you're sort of independent. It means that you're sort of cut off from all others.
Yeah.
Whereas over here, actually, if you look at the 6 points of self-reliance, or even before that, when he talks about where does this confidence in the present come from, which is the self-reliance. Your confidence in the present comes from being able to live in relationships, which comes from being able to understand relationships. So, like, a tree is reliant on so many things to remain
Alive
to
and
alive
thrive.
and thrive, yeah. Similarly, human beings will be able to really be self-reliant when they're able to recognize just how they are interconnected with each part of nature as well as, I mean, non-human nature as well as human nature.
Yeah.
So when you recognize just how interdependent we are, then you can work to kind of fit in properly. And then you see, just how you can fit in all these relationships. Rather than thinking, oh, all of these relationships are difficult. So how do I step out of all of them and just rely, just try to do everything by myself? So actually the 6 points of self-reliance are, they start with Swayam mein Vishwas is confidence in oneself, which comes from an understanding of oneself, which means like the magnitude of that is pretty large. It's basically Jeevan understanding what the Jeevan is, which is, that these are my potentials and this is my purpose and these are my inexhaustible powers and strengths and all that. This is my goal and this is what understanding oneself is, and this is what leads to confidence.
Right.
And then the second point is a respect for greatness. So that already kind of starts linking you with others. And then the third one is sociable in one's behavior. So basically, sociable itself means living in justice. So when you look at, this is a 5-point thing. So when you start, it's slowly, going from understanding oneself to recognizing what is good, then being able to interact with goodness and greatness and, cherishing what is good. And then Vyavasayam is Swavalambhi. So this is the point we are talking about, which is being actually before that comes being having a balanced personality and talent. So there's something which is your personality, and then you have talent, and there being a balance between the two of these. So talents is where our abilities to do work actually come in, and personality is where our values come in. So to be self-reliant, we need to be able to evaluate everything. How an evaluation is just seeing the relationship everything has with everything else. And so our personality is all about our values, and our talents is all about our abilities, physically or mentally. And so a balance between those would be where you don't, you're not kind of negating one for the other. We have a great sorts. It's never happens really. You might have a great personality with no talents, because that means they haven't quite understood the value of being contributive and productive and all that. So actually that personality is still incomplete. Whereas there are several examples of people who are supposed to be very, very talented, but with no real value system. So they're not, maybe there's an arrogance about it. There are lots of ways that can happen. So that's another part of it. And it's interesting to think about why this point is a part of self-reliance. I mean, it's just information for now. And then after all this comes, being able to be Swavalambhi in your occupation. Swavalambhi is self sort of word enterprise or something like that. Self-reliant in
Sufficient.
occupation.
Self-reliant.
Self-sufficient.
Sufficiency.
So self-sufficiency in occupation. And what that means is that you recognize how everything is related, but you also recognize your role and you build your talents accordingly. And then you make yourself capable of producing as much value as you need for your body. Maybe you won't produce all the things you need for your body, but you'll want to produce as much value as is needed to even exchange for fulfilling the needs of your body. So maybe you are producing just rice and corn, but enough value in rice and corn that you can fulfill all the other needs. And actually, when you talk about occupation, that's when you realize that actually what Prachi was saying, it's not for oneself. Occupation is never for oneself, because the first part of self-reliance is recognizing relationships. So everyone first and foremost recognizes that they're part of a family. And so their responsibilities are towards the family. And samriddhi, always prosperity, can only happen in the family. So you become capable of, producing as much, and then every member of the family feels that way. So it's not one person doing it for everyone. All members come together to produce enough value to meet everyone and more.
I think this is it's a very beautiful way to see self-reliance, right? Because you're seeing how to make yourself self-reliant in a system, within a system, and to see where you are in the system and how you can contribute and receive both. Like you have to water the tree, or you have to make a happy relationship, or that's all part of self-reliance, right? So it's like actually it's not self-reliance as an independent capacity, but it's actually like how to
Interdependent.
Surrender, be flexible, adapt. So many things. All that comes into self-reliance. Like how to be strong so that you can and sane, so you can actually be
in those relationships,
in a just and kind of so if you see in that way, it's like beautiful actually.
Yeah, exactly. Like self-reliance requires you to first and foremost be able to participate in a just manner with your human relations, and in a lawful manner with nature.
Yeah.
And
that's what
I think
we're not
recognizing that we're like you can't separate yourself from the whole in some ways helps you to be actually truly self-reliant. Otherwise, independence doesn't make any sense. Actually, that is actually like then you have to be exploitative because you see yourself as separate, and then either you're taking or you're giving, but in a not in a mutual way.
Yeah.
Whereas if you see yourself first, understanding ourselves in relation to the system would make the first step in some ways to.
Yes. And I think then the question only whether you should be independently self-reliant dissolves. Because then it's
no, actually they get redefined.
Like in a way now it's a self-reliance as a unit together, and even broadening the definition of self-reliance. So how you achieve it then that becomes a means. So you're correct. It redefines in a way that because they've redefined the word also, no? That what are we, like, not redefined, but defined it properly. That what are we saying then, self-reliance. So then your confusion goes out.
Actually, you're right. Independence, that term itself is problematic. It's the English word, whereas in Hindi it's swatantrita, which is swa is self and tantrita is governance. So being self-regulated is independent, which means you are self-motivated to participate, basically. Whereas independence is like nirbharta, where you can never be non-dependent. You're making self-reliant is making yourself capable of being in the system.
Correct.
Someone was saying that, or telling you that, I think Daniel Schmachtenberger or somebody was saying that actually, why do people talk about independence? In nature, in whole of existence, there's not a single example of independence, actually, because nothing is not dependent on each other or linked to each other. So I think that's very powerful also to recognize, because independence is so strongly as a kind of, high value as well. And it's probably what causes so many problems, right? Because it's also very insecure kind of way of thinking, right? Because independent is like you're alone in some ways, out of the whole, which one can never be, but the expectation that it might be cause so much imbalance, uncertainty, confusion, and fear, right? Because
that's what
doesn't make any sense.
Exactly, because that is the root cause of fear. That's why when we talk about fearlessness at the level of society, it's all about being able to have confidence in the present, which is being able to live in relationships. So fearlessness is being able to live in relationships.
Yeah.
Without that, you're constantly insecure. Right? Yeah. This is actually.
I think I love this point. Go on. Sorry.
No, you say.
This independent, there's nothing independent in nature, and that entire idea is such false thing, no? And then we hear it so commonly every day in language that I want to be independent, I want to be on my own, and which is in itself a very problem. I would say, which very wrong and very problematic conception we all carry, that I want to be independent.
I will bring up our kids telling them they must be independent, and it doesn't make any sense. And so, it's not surprising that kids become destabilized by that expectation.
Correct.
In fact, this is, I think, why independence has been valued. Actually, it's not just in modernity, not just in science that it's been valued. This is exactly what we had covered last time, which was that both because one didn't recognize, society wasn't able to recognize that complementarity is the principle of nature. So we thought that, so actually we will become happy when we are able to find our way of being complementary to each other. And instead of that, both tradition, like in terms of idealism, idealistic traditions also felt that you're supposed to be completely free and completely independent and unaffected by everything else. And then science also came along and says, yeah, actually, yeah, nature is full of struggle. And tradition was saying, idealism was saying, existence is full of strife. And you need to, therefore, so idealism is saying it's full of strife. You need to withdraw yourself and be self-reliant in that way. And science was saying, no, nature is full of struggle. So you need to compete and exploit and become your own independent, supreme sort of entity in that way. Which is very, like, that is so extremely, that's an absurd notion that it can even be achieved. It will destroy everything. So, yeah, that's why that independence has been a problem from both ends, actually.
Yeah.
That isolation.
When you look at it, it seems so obvious that it's like, really, how can it ever stand up to? How can people just not say, like, this doesn't make any sense?
So absurd, yeah. Whereas, so independence, and I was just thinking maybe a better word might be interdependence. But then even that word is like there is that dependency that is, I mean, of course, there is a thing such as dependency, but I find complementarity covers it a lot more because it encapsulates that, there is things are a system in themselves and also part of the larger system. So there is some completeness and wholeness as well as a network. So it's not one versus the other. It's not either you're completely dependent or you're completely isolated. Yeah, there is this notion of lesser and lesser affected. I mean, there is that notion, we'll come across it, and there is swatantrita, but that's a whole different thing. There is a tantra, there is a regulation within it. Interesting vocabulary for English. We have to think about. Oh, it's already 7:30. Oh, Manjuji, I think you must have forgotten. Okay.
Oh, really? It's 7:30. So fast today.
Yeah. So, sometimes we can have revisit and I think that's what was really useful for me when we used to do our Saturday evening Parichay reading. We spent half the time just discussing our week and half the time reading the book. And in doing that, you're able to see the connections between what you're going through and then what is written. That's really useful.
And that kind of grounds it much more, no, in your own reference and own reality.
Yeah. And then you can make it your own. Then you feel like, oh, this is why I need to think about it. We can think about it.
I can read a bit, whatever. Is that not a point?
No, we can. Do you want to do a bit? I mean, we started a little late also.
Yeah. Like
It's that.
it anyways has been more of a conversation today. So if it's going somewhere, if we are more points we're saying, we can continue for a little more.
So then, okay, instead of starting the recording, let me just do a bit of revision of what we did last time. And then because it will kind of connect to all that we discussed also. So, like last time we had started out with this, that, the Jeevan existence, what is true? I mean, that was last time. We ended on what is truth, and truth is existence, and existence itself is coexistence. And so, as a result of coexistence, there has been this progression of development and because of coexistence, there is this inherent complementarity, and which leads to this inherent progression towards development and development that leads to the Jeevan. And that humans have had no role in any of this. This has been a natural emergence. All the four orders emerged on their own, and even the ratio of how many Jeevans there need to be, really, there was no 5-year plan decided by humans. It was just naturally emerging because that was appropriate. And so it was, we had entered on how that nature itself is complementary and humans have not understood it. And so humans have thought that humans have sought their happiness not in complementarity but in exploitation, and how all our our families, our societies, our nations, our constitutions, and all of these structures have inherently had exploitation as a principle. Whether, I mean, it wasn't explicitly, whether it was explicitly articulated or not, it ended up being exploitation, because if you don't recognize complementarity, you end up exploiting it, as we discussed. So idealism went into exploitation. Idealism went into exploitation by in the form of communalism. So all sects and their religions and all would be like, okay, we'll take care of our own, but we'll exploit the other and let the other kind of basically exploit the other and eventually even destroy the other. That's what all communalism ends up turning into. So unless you have something which is universal, unless you have something which is universally naturally acceptable, otherwise it can't be universal. It turns up becoming a commune. It turns up becoming then therefore communal, in which there's a sentiment of us and them. And whenever there's an us and them, there is exploitation. So that was the idealistic trajectory towards exploitation, whereas the materialistic trajectory towards exploitation was inherent in this very worldview, which is that nature is struggle, and there is a struggle for survival, and so there it must be competition, and the big fish eats the small fish. And actually, sorry, the communal one ends up becoming might is right, and this one ends up becoming to each their own. So everyone competes for their own good, and in that process, we don't just, I mean, it's not just the other, the outside other that we end up exploiting. In this materialistic trajectory, we even end up exploiting our very own family members, who are supposedly, minimum, at least they would be considered our own in any other idealistic society. So in both these situations, we ended up being exploited. And so development was considered to be, that they were considered developed, who were able to dominate more, who were able to exploit more. So nations with more warfare, equipment for warfare, or nations with greater business capital were considered, basically generating more profit, were considered more developed. And profit is generated through exploitation of others' resources. So in this way, we haven't been able to recognize complementarity. And then this kind of comes back to how what we must understand. So the way we understand, so we must understand the complementarity, and for that we must understand the Jeevan. And the way we understand the Jeevan and the way we understand existence is different. And we've been going about understanding existence, but the way to do the Jeevan is going to be different. And the way we've understood existence is through its utility. So all of non-human nature, we understand in terms of its utility. So, and utility is in two parts. In human terms, we think of utility A for our basic aspirations and B for our enterprisal aspirations. So we've been able to identify and recognize nature in terms of these two categories. So this is good for our food, shelter, or water. This is good for our telecommunication or transportation. So we've been able to do that, and therefore we've been able to, since we've been able to recognize it, we've been able to also fulfill our need for it. But then this lack of understanding led us to also bring along this course of profit and commerce, which turned it into business exploitation industry. But besides that, we have at least been able to recognize nature. But I think when, yeah, that's what we have covered. Uh, Oh, yeah. So then when we actually recognize their utility, which is when we actually understand human needs, that's when we are able to actually work towards prosperity. So until we recognize what our needs really are, like how much is our need for food, how much is our need for shelter, how much is it for apparel, how much for transportation, how much for telecommunication. Until we're able to really recognize that, we can never have enough of it because enough is based on how much we need. So we need to act to be truly able to understand nature also, to fully understand it and recognize it in its entirety. We need to understand ourselves because we're recognizing it in that context. And we must understand our needs, and in order to, and then we also must become self-reliant. And self-reliant has these 6 points. And then upon recognizing our needs and becoming self-reliant in fulfilling all these needs, and part of these needs are also then, so first you was talking about the material aspect, but in self-reliance also comes our non-material needs. We recognize all of that and then we become self-reliant. So basically we become self-reliant, then we can work towards prosperity, which is in the family, and then we can work towards social contribution. So he talks about how evidencing in humans has to occur at these 3 levels. It has to be in the individual as self-reliance first, then in the family as prosperity. And prosperity is, again, that will be discussed at some other stage. You can't have prosperity in unjust relationships either. So no matter how much you have, it will be insufficient because we'll go into it. But and then it's only then can you find humans participating in the larger. Upon being prosperous, which happens upon being self-reliant, we find that humans are able to participate in the social world. So these are the 3 levels we want to evidence at.
So prosperity is only found at the level of family. Like if you can never be prosperous as an individual,
Yeah,
and you can't be prosperous as a community. It's just a
you
society.
can. So a lot of like a group of families can be prosperous. But the first unit at which you feel prosperous is at the level. Because the identification of your own material needs also can't happen in isolation of the other people you are